The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
There was a family that lived around the corner from us when I was a little kid. And they had a son, an only boy. They had girls, but only one boy. And this boy, I still remember his name was Louis. And Louis was about a year older than me and about a year and a half younger than my brother. So he's right in between our ages. And his parents used to bring him over to play with us. He didn't have any boys to play with in his house, so he could play with the Wikler boys. And one day, I remember it was in the summer, my brother and I were, I guess, getting bored, and our mother, Leah Shalom, had Rahmanas on us, and she said, "You know what, I'm going to take you boys fishing." Oh, that sounds exciting for a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old boy going to go fishing. So we took our rods, and she was going to take us out to a little creek not far from our house, and we'd go fishing. And then she said, "You know what, I feel sorry for Louis. Let's invite him to come along to us." Okay, fine. So Louis came with us. We went down to this creek, just a couple minutes from our house, this small creek, and I'm absolutely certain there were no fish in this creek. But to a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, it was like deep sea fishing. We're going to come home with buckets of fish. That's what we imagined. And we're fishing, and of course, we're not catching anything, but we're having a good time. And somehow, instinctively, all children have this sense, which is not so far from the truth, that if you throw your line out further, you have a better chance of catching fish. Now, I don't think there were any fish there, but we're trying to get our lines out further. And my mother, Leah Shalom, was afraid we shouldn't fall in the water. So, as we're leaning to get the line out further, so I remember she was holding on to the belt of my pants so that I shouldn't fall in the water. My older brother was a little more adventurous, and he was able to step on a rock that was in the water and kind of lean over that way and get his line out. So my mother, Leah Shalom, couldn't grab his belt because he was too far in the water, but he was older and he was more agile, and she let him stand on the rock. Well, of course, Louis wanted to do the same thing, but he wasn't as agile as my brother, and he wasn't as old as him, and his mother wasn't there to hold on to his belt, so he's leaning to get his line into the water, and you can just imagine what happened. Louis fell in. Now, it wasn't dangerous, it wasn't deep, but he got soaking wet. So we were there for a while fishing. We didn't catch anything. It was time to come home. And now that Louis got wet, we certainly have to come home. So we got in the car. It was a short drive back to home. And the whole way, Louis is practically wailing. And my mother Hashem said, "It's water. It's wet. What are you worried about?" He said, "Oh boy. Oh boy, when I get home." Now, you don't hear the term today, but when I was a kid, if a child received corporal punishment, there was a term for that called the licking. I don't know where that came from, but that was it. You give your child a good licking. That was the expression. It means you beat him up. And Louis was saying, "Oh, when I get home, I'm going to get such a licking." So he said, "Oh, I'm sure your parents will understand. It was an accident. You fell in the water." No, they don't tolerate this. They don't take. Oh, he was just wailing, and we felt so bad for him. And my mother, Leah Shalom, said, "You know what, Louis? I'll go in and explain to your parents that it was an accident. If you want, I'll go in and tell them." Louis said, "No, I'll handle it myself." And I remember we pulled up to the house. There was a walkway to get to this house, and we were just sitting in the car. And our hearts went out, the three of us, me, my brother, and my mother, Leah Shalom, what's going to be with Louis? And he walked in like a man walking to the gallows. That's how we walked into his house. We felt so sorry for him. And we wondered what happened to Louis after that. How did he survive that licking he was going to get? So, of course, we didn't have any way of finding out. And my mother, Leah Shalom, didn't want to call. It was none of her business. The next day she went shopping. And who do you think she met in the grocery store? Louis's mother. Now, my mother, Leah Shalom, didn't have the chutzpah to say what happened. But she was so curious, so she went over to Louis's mother and just started engaging in conversation. "How are you?" and how's everything? And Louis's mother said, "You know, it was so nice of you, Mrs. Wikler, that you offered to take Louis fishing. with you and your boys. That was really such a generous thing. And I was always glad to do it. He's such a lovely boy. He's such a sweet boy. And she didn't say anything. And then she was waiting to hear if the mother's going to reveal what happened when Louis came home. And she said, you know, and wasn't that really brave of Louis? And my mother said, what are you referring to? She said, well, Louis told me what happened when you went fishing. And my mother said, oh, he did? Yes. He told me how Meir fell in the water and he had to jump in to save his life. And I thought I was so proud of Louis that he could do a thing like that. So my mother had to bite her lip, prevent herself from laughing. And she got home, she told us we were rolling. Obviously, Louis knew that he couldn't tell the truth in his home. And he obviously had to lie. He made up such a fib, and his parents believed it, that I had fallen in the water and he had to jump in to save me. But that's a classic example of how parents can teach their child to lie. And I think that's what this phono is hinting at, that you have to be careful as parents. If you're going to punish your child for admitting wrongdoing, then you're teaching your child to lie, and that's something you should never do.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org